Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you are tuning in. Welcome to Homesteading and Gardening in the Suburbs. I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening, and today I'm talking about some companion plants that you might want to consider adding to your garden. So you might be thinking, especially if you're new to the podcast, what is a companion plant? Well, companion plants add diversity to the garden. They help to bring in and attract pollinators. They provide shelter and attract beneficial predators like predatory wasps, lacewings, ladybugs, or as we know them in England, ladybirds, right? They help to confuse pests, right? They help to mask their favorite snack, which just happens to be your lovingly cared for veggies, by, masking them with smells or different textures, right? That help kind of break up the patterns that insects are looking for. But they also provide shelter for a lot of these insects that we want to have in the garden, right? And one of the wonderful things about having companion plants in the garden is that you can really help to encourage nature to start looking after things, in your garden themselves. Like, nature has this wonderful way of maintaining its own set of checks and balances. If you have the means for predators in the garden to make themselves a home, and by predators I'm meaning things like birds and predatory insects, right? But not like bears and stuff like that. Well, I don't want any more run-ins with bears, thanks. I've had enough in my life. But by having some of those things that are there, you're going to help have an organic garden that's going to be a lot more kind of self-sufficient, right? There's a lot less that you need to be doing because nature is taking care of it for you. Like, normally we as a gardener tend to have to step in if those pest numbers are really starting to get out of control. And one of the great things about companion planting is you're providing, a means to bring in those beneficial insects that are in there. And another good thing for having companion plants in there, like I mentioned, was pollinators. And pollinators, you want to bring as many pollinators into your garden as possible, because what happens is when you bring pollinators in, other insects start to look around and see, what else is there to, that I can have here? You're kind of creating this all-you-can-eat buffet for them, which is great, because if you are growing lots of fruiting vegetables, so things that produce flowers to then produce, the crops that you want to eat. So let's say squash, for example. I know I need to stop thinking about squash. I mean, I'm sorry. All the examples seem to be squashes. I must be slightly squash obsessed or something, or squashest. Is that a term? There must be some sort of garden nerd term for people that are kind of obsessed with squashes. If you know of one, let me know. But peas, beans, those kind of crops, chilies, tomatillos, okra, tomatoes. Those kind of crops that are producing flowers, melons, cucumbers. Oh my gosh, now I'm thinking of them. Those things, they produce flowers, and the sole, reason for the flowers is to attract an insect that is going to visit them and then help distribute that pollen to produce seeds so they can reproduce and provide seeds, right? That's what plants want to do. They grow, they reproduce, they feed us, and they produce seeds. So one of the wonderful things of having companion plants is if you're able to attract in different pollinators, whether it is honeybees or bumblebees or different types of wasps, or butterflies, right, or even birds in some cases, you're going to be able to have them come in. They're going to know to come back and visit your garden. Certainly in the case of honeybees, if you have a lot of flowers that are there, then the honeybee worker that discovers your garden is going to go back to the hive and tell her colony friends that, hey, you gotta come visit this place. They've got some real good stuff over here. So that's what we're really wanting to do. And the more pollinators that you can bring in, the better chances you have of having your crops being pollinated. And guess what? More pollination means more crops for you, higher yields, right? And you're able to, have a garden that is really heavy at producing. One of the best things that, we noticed when we started having our own bees in Utah was how much more our crops got pollinated by having bees in such a close proximity. And after kind of the first or second year that we had just moved into the property out there, we realized that when we left some carrots and things to go to seed in the garden that had been left from the previous owners, all of these bees and all of these wasps came to the garden. And they weren't like, the paper stinging wasps that people normally, associate with, horrible, stinging insects, or the winged a-holes, as they're somewhat affectionately known. But sometimes having those kind of insects there, again, it's bringing in that, natural balance and natural order. They all have a role to play, even those types of wasps. But having this like beautiful row of all these flowering carrots brought pretty much every pollinator to the yard. And I remember my neighbor, before we had the final fence put up, he was kind of saying to me, it's like, your garden is always alive with stuff. There's always something to see. There's always birds that are in there. There's always, bees. It's just alive and full of stuff. And we always had good crops because we had all of these beautiful pollinators that were coming in and able to kind of keep things in check. Now, of course, where you live is going to differ, right, from my garden. Certainly my new garden here in Maine is going to be very different from the one that I had in Utah. And one of the things that we kind of start to get an understanding of as a gardener is how our garden plays a role in the bigger ecosystem and the landscape that we are in, right? There's a lot of different bugs and things that are going to be out here in Maine that I've never encountered before, and it's going to be kind of exciting to see what comes into the garden. And one of the best ways that I can do that is by planting companion plants. So let's talk about 5 of my favorite companion plants to add to your garden. And most of these work for most areas. Some of them, that you can get might need a little bit of babying. They might need a little bit of, careful selection in where they're going to be growing, to make sure that they have the right conditions so they really flourish and produce those beautiful flowers that look just lovely in a vegetable garden. So let's go with number 1, which of course is French marigolds, or also known just as marigolds. French marigolds are part of the Tagetes family, and they're very well known for being a pest repellent. And marigolds are really good at bringing in pollinators like bumblebees and also honeybees. They also are really good for providing shelter for predators like ladybirds or ladybugs. And they also help to deter pests like aphids, which is interesting because aphids are what a ladybird or ladybug predominantly feeds on. So having marigolds growing around some veggies that are very prone and very susceptible to aphid or black fly or white fly attack, like your cabbages or your brassicas or your collards, right? Those kind of cole crops are very, very well sought after by, certain types of aphids. And I've seen it all over the place wherever I've lived and garden. They are just, aphid magnets. But having marigolds grown amongst them, in between them, if you're growing in rows, stuff like that, that really helps to kind of control the numbers. And marigolds, there's also some studies that are being done to see how well they perform at deterring soil-borne pests like nematodes. So there's a lot of upcoming research that's being done into organic gardening and organic farming from using some of these kind of companion planting techniques, which is kind of exciting for us as a gardener. But marigolds bring a beautiful display of colour, right, from deep oranges, yellows, reds, burgundies that look incredibly striking against a backdrop of bright green in the vegetable garden. And one of the key things throughout all of these, certainly the flower types of companion plants, is to keep them regularly deadheaded, which means that, once they've been pollinated, the blooms start to fade, they start to shrivel. You want to just go through and kind of cut those off. You can pop them into the compost pile. If you're not saving them for a seed because it's kind of early in the season, you want to kind of let them have a couple of flourishes of flowers, not for seeds. And the best way to do that is to deadhead. And, again, you're just kind of going through and, you can take them off with a pair of secateurs or hand pruners or even scissors for some things. And that's going to help them produce new flower buds and have them, flower again for you. One of the things that I am really sad to say, I really used to enjoy deadheading my mum's hanging baskets back in England. She always had these beautiful hanging baskets that just had this gorgeous cascade of petunias or trailing lobelia, and they just looked absolutely wonderful. And I could actually do hanging baskets this season. Oh, that's a good thought. I couldn't do them in Utah because they dried out so incredibly quickly. After a couple of years of me trying to do it, I just kind of figured this wasn't the climate. But it's a lot more humid here on the East Coast, so I could definitely look at doing hanging baskets again. Anyway, I used to really enjoy kind of going through and deadheading them all and, getting rid of all those spent blooms, putting them in the compost pile because, a few days later they would be, flush with more flowers again, which was always lovely. And of course, that brings in all the beneficial pollinators again. My number 2 companion plant, which might be a little surprising because it's not, something that's edible or anything like that, and neither are marigolds really, but zinnias are something that I love to grow in my garden. I always think that they are truly beautiful, and if you're looking to bring in the butterflies and the bees, then you really can't go wrong with planting zinnias. And they come in such a gorgeous array of colors and also the types of flowers. So you have these very simple flowers that look kind of almost like a daisy or a cosmos, through to these beautiful double petal types that look like dahlias or dahlias, I guess, depending on where you are and how you pronounce it. I typically find that pollinators visit the simple flowered varieties more than the double petaled fancier types, and that's the same for roses. I always see that you see way more pollinators visiting those simple kind of Japanese or rugosa roses than the beautiful, heavily scented, double frilly hybrid tea roses, right? Simpler always seems to be the better when it comes to attracting pollinators into your garden. Again, if you want to keep them blooming, you want to keep deadheading them to encourage new flowers to form throughout that growing season. My number 3 is sweet alyssum, or alyssum as we keep calling it, which isn't right. That's what me and my husband call it. But this is a low-growing annual flower, and it provides these beautiful masses of honey-scented tiny flowers. It's almost like this gorgeous carpet. And I've grown this in kind of like an orchard permaculture guild type of fashion, where I've had sweet alyssum just growing all the way in swathes underneath the orchard, and it just, again, it's a beautiful way to bring in the pollinators. What wasn't so great is it was a popular place where the dogs like to run through, so of course they would always be disturbing honeybees and stuff that were there, gathering nectar and stuff. So I wouldn't necessarily plant sweet alyssum somewhere where is going to be getting a lot of foot traffic particularly, but if it's something that you want to have kind of in a border somewhere towards a corner, it's done well in kind of dappled shade, full sun, and kind of that semi-sunny positioning. It grows really well, and again, it's one of those low growing plants that is just really good at kind of pushing out the weeds as well as encouraging pollinators to it. I think that if it is grown near plants that you want pollinators to visit, so let's say that you've had some troubles growing cucumbers and it's had masses of flowers on them but it's never set fruit, then pollination could be the problem. So maybe try growing sweet alyssum near cucumbers or squashes that are growing up a trellis, right, and kind of having them at the front, covering around the base. But also you could try growing it next to eggplant or peppers or okra, things that are going to want you to attract pollinators to them, so they kind of see, oh hey, what's this while I'm here, this looks interesting. So that's a good tip for you there. Number 4 is sunflowers. Oh my goodness, I love sunflowers. Grow these towards the back of a garden bed so that they don't shade out plants growing behind them. Sunflowers grow tall, if you didn't know, and they are a beeline for so many pollinators and birds. The sunflowers in late summer and fall always would attract birds to the garden, which would then help out with the cricket and grasshopper issue that happened where I lived in Utah every late summer. So I always grew sunflowers to help bring the birds in, to help reduce the cricket numbers when I didn't have chickens anymore. I love to grow a variety of sunflowers in the garden. There's just something about seeing the beautiful flowers against a brilliant blue sky in summer that just brings joy to my soul. And sunflowers are just such a great plant to start with for kids too, because the seeds are pretty big, they're easy to plant, and they're kind of fun for kids to grow. And you can do little competitions and games to see who can grow the biggest sunflower or the prettiest sunflower, the tallest sunflower, right, the biggest head sunflower. There's just so many things that you can do there. And then of course the fun doesn't stop there. You can try saving seeds with them, or you can make them into a bird feeder that you can then hang, whether it's in a chicken coop or out for the birds naturally, right? There's a lot of things that you can do with sunflowers, which is really pretty fun. Although I will say that every year that I've grown sunflowers, I've always found volunteer sunflowers that are growing over, the next years after that, which is kind of nice. And I sometimes let them just grow there anyway, because it's nice to see them. But sunflowers are one of my favourite companion plants to be growing. And of course, the other thing with sunflowers is that they make a really good trellis for things like climbing beans. So, you can use that kind of three sisters method of growing, whereas, it traditionally would be corn, beans, and a squash. You could also opt in, sunflowers rather than corn. And that's also a pretty good companion or polyculture gardening method to try, because your beans, again, they're providing the nitrogen that is then helping your sunflowers to keep growing and growing tall. And then you can have a squash or cucumbers or something like that growing on the bottom, which are providing shade and helping retain moisture in the soil. So that's one that's kind of an easy one to try if you're wanting to look at doing kind of a companion planting on a slightly larger scale, and you want to see how you can make things have things that are a bit more edible in the garden with your flowers. That might be a good one for you to try. And my last one for today's episode, there's so many different companion plants that are there, but my last one is fennel, the herb fennel, not the bulbing form, which I do love, but more like a bronze fennel, which is one of those plants that can come back year after year. It's a perennial if you live in a mild climate area. My parents had one that grew in the front garden for, oh my gosh, donkey's years, so long. It prefers those Mediterranean type of conditions, but it does grow very well, and it brings in not only bees and hoverflies, which are a type of predator. Hoverflies, they look kind of like a wasp, but they're not. But they also are good for attracting lacewings, ladybirds, ladybugs, and also the elusive praying mantis, which can find shelter basically in the canes of a fennel plant. So praying mantis is kind of tall, grassy kind of things, and fennel fits the bill really well. And of course, you can use the fennel after the plants have, pollinated. You can take the seeds and use the fennel seeds. You can use the fennel fronds in cooking, right? It's a pretty versatile plant. You can even take the larger fronds that form on fennel and kind of cut them back to canes, and you can use the canes in making things with fish, or with anything else that you kind of like to have that fennelly aniseed flavor with. So fennel's kind of one of those underrated herbs, but when it comes to being a companion plant, it is very much a one of those plants that it is great to have in there because it brings in so many beneficial insects into the area. So if you've got room for it, definitely consider putting in something like bronze fennel. It can get pretty tall, so it's one that might do better in a separate area or to the back of the border. And then again, if you live in a mild climate area, then be prepared for it to be coming back year after year. But let me know over in the Facebook group what your favorite companion plants are. What do you like to grow in your garden, and what have you seen it attract in terms of beneficial insects? I would love to know, so head on over to the Facebook group. There are questions to get into the Facebook group, and my team only let you in if you answer all of them, just to keep down on having like weird random requests come through Facebook or whatnot. So if you want in on the group, make sure you answer the questions. And until next time, have a wonderful week. I hope your garden grows beautifully, and I will see you all next week.